Hello everyone, my name is Sunde, and today I'll be providing you with a brief overview of the 61 Warlock build. Now the concept behind this build is to place tons of death dots while weaving in refreshers and damage buffs to keep your dots going as strong as possible. This build that I will be showing you today is 61 Warlock, 8 Pyromancer, and 7 Necromancer. The 61 points into Warlock unlock all of the damage and utility you will need, while leaving enough points left over to get 2 more dots and some more damage buffs. Spending 8 in Pyromancer will get you Countdown, which will be used in the initial dot placement and as a filler spell, as well as getting you Fiery Concentration for the pushback reduction, Ignition for the cast time reduction and mana cost, and finally giving you Burning Fury for the crit hit buff. Lastly, the 7 points in the Necro give you Necrosis, which is one of the dots you will be keeping up throughout the fight. Death's Ally, which will be a flat increase in damage, and Flesh Rot, which will increase the duration on Necrosis and increase its damage by 60% for base and 30% for spell power it receives. Now that we're through with talents, let's go over the rotation and the general feel of the build. As I said earlier, the point of this build is to keep dots up and ticking with refreshers while utilizing your damage buffs to their max. This build uses the following dots to be kept up at all times: Life Leech, Atrophy, Dark Touch, Necrosis, and lastly Death's Door. Death's Door is special because it can be only put up when the boss is below 50% health, but when that does happen, it must be kept up at all times. So let's go through each dot one by one. Life Leech. This is a basic cast time dot that returns a bit of health and does moderate damage. Atrophy. This dot ticks for more damage the longer it lasts, which plays a minor role in the rotation, and it also does good damage. The next is Defile. This dot hits pretty hard, but consumes charge while active, thus earning its spot as the last dot to be placed if freshly applying dots. So now onto the refreshers. First is Void Barrage. This spell refreshes all of the dots on the target and deals a ton of damage. It deals enough damage to be used off cooldown and is suited to be used with your biggest damage cooldown, such as Empowered Darkness. The next refresher is Persist. This spell only refreshes dots, so it should be used only when Void Barrage is on cooldown. The last and least likely to be used is Salvage Corruption into Deathly Pall. Since it uses 2 global cooldowns, this combination to refresh dots is the least DPS and should only be used to transfer dots in multi-boss fights or when your attention is needed elsewhere. For example, when switching to the Bird ad on Grand Falconer Zolas in Triumph of the Dragon Queen. The last thing we have to go over for major abilities is damage buffs. The first and foremost is Empowered Darkness. This is a big daddy of damage buffs and should be used off cooldown when reapplying dots alongside Void Barrage. This spell increases your damage by 40%, which applies to your dots when you refresh them. So the next buff we have to talk about is Sacrifice Life Damage. This is a 20% damage buff lasting 15 seconds with 30-second cooldown and should be used off cooldown when reapplying dots with either Void Barrage or Persist. The last buff is Contaminate, which increases the damage of your dots by 20% and only applies to dots and uses charge when you cast dots with this active. This buff you will only use when both Empowered Darkness and Sacrifice Life Damage are on cooldown. So, now that we went through what our spells do, let's take a look at the rotation in the order of importance. Obviously, the first thing we need to do in entering a boss fight is to apply our dots. So we cast Life Leech, Countdown, Atrophy, Necrosis, Dark Touch, and Defile. Then we start with our refreshes and damage buffs. So we want to use our biggest first and get the most out of them during a fight, so we cast Empowered Darkness and Void Barrage. Then we filler until Necrosis is at 1 to 2 seconds, and then after that we use Persist since Void Barrage is on cooldown. At this time, Empowered Darkness should be falling off, so you sacrifice life damage and a filler. Use Void Barrage off cooldown, and Persist when Necrosis is about to fall off, and you don't have Void Barrage. So the damage buffs should look like this: Empowered Darkness for 15 seconds, Sacrifice Life for 15 seconds, Contaminate until Sacrifice Life is off cooldown, and then Empowered Darkness again, and then rinse and repeat, which is pretty easy. For filler spells, use Consuming Agony when you get the proc first, then Countdown, then Draining Bolt, then Nedger's Grasp, and Void Bolt for the spam. Below 50% nothing really changes, except keeping up Death's Door at all times. So, in closing, we went over the build, the abilities, and the rotation. My average DPS with this build in starter raid gear is about 11 to 14k DPS depending on the boss. In closing, I want to say that I have had fun with this build. While it is simple, it does add a ton of utility to the mage class and also damage. And it's a great alternative to Pyromancer. Also, any feedback would be greatly appreciated. I will try to keep this guide up to date with any changes I may make in the future. And if you like this video, please hit thumbs up. follow the Grindhouse Gaming YouTube channel, and visit www.grindhousegaming.com for more information. If you didn't like this video, leave any questions that you may have in the comments below, and we will try to get them answered. This has been Sunday from Grindhouse Gaming. See y'all later.